Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wolf Pit with another episode of What Are We Eating? Today I'm going to be trying the 19-ounce cans of Progresso's Pitmaster soups. They cost $2.48 each. With these cans of Pitmaster soups, it's barbecue season all year round. Now in my humble opinion, Progresso soups are notoriously very bland. But with that said, I always have several cans of their Progresso lentil soup and their Progresso hearty tomato soup, which I usually use as a base and doctor it up to my liking. So hopefully with these being Pitmaster soups, they'll smack you in the mouth with flavor. Now for our final can of Progresso Pitmaster soup, which is the barbecue style grilled chicken and fire roasted corn soup. Here's a list of ingredients. The whole can of soup has 270 calories, 2.5 grams of total fat, a half a gram of saturated fat, no trans fat, 30 milligrams of cholesterol, 1,490 milligrams of sodium, 50 grams of carbohydrates, 9 grams of fiber, 12 grams of sugars, and 20 grams of protein. Now for the fourth and final time, let's get our soup out of the can, into the pan, and get it heated up. And once the can was open and we poured out the contents, I could immediately smell the smoky aroma. And that could be a good thing, or it could be a bad thing. We'll see. Now once our Pitmaster soup was thoroughly heated, we gave it one final mix. And then we got a big old spoonful of the chicken, the corn, the broth, and the beans. Visually, the soup looks pretty good, especially the roasted corn with the char on it. So into the old pie hole, and down the gullet it went. As soon as that spoonful went into my mouth, I remembered one thing about Progresso soups, specifically their minestrone soup. The beans are never fully cooked. They're always still very firm, which was the case with this soup. And I'm not really sure if the chicken is real chicken or a formed meat slurry concocted chicken. In either case, the chicken was very dry and somewhat tough. So far, the first can of Progresso Pitmaster soup is very typical of all Progresso soups. It's very bland. I mean, even with all the sodium, it doesn't have a whole lot of flavor, other than the smoky flavor, which tastes just like liquid smoke, which I personally don't care for. When I saw the term Pitmaster on this can of soup, I was expecting a more hearty soup with more full, robust flavors. But I was highly disappointed, which is why I'm giving Progresso's barbecue style soup, Smokehouse style soup, a 2 out of 10. So let's start off with the Progresso Pitmaster Smokehouse style grilled chicken and pasta with roasted vegetable soup. Now here's the list of ingredients, and I'm happy to say at least it looks like the chicken is all chicken and nothing but chicken with a grilled white chicken meat. It doesn't mention anything about texture vegetable protein or other fillers in the chicken. Other than the fillers, you can also tell that it's a formed meat slurry concoction if the white meat chicken contains rib meat. At least that's my theory, and I'm sticking to it. Now one thing I do see in the ingredients that I do not like is the mesquite smoke flavor, which unfortunately is more than likely liquid smoke, which in my opinion isn't very tasty. Progresso says there's 2 servings per can, but who eats only a half a can of soup? So the whole can of soup has 310 calories, 7 grams of total fat, 1.5 grams of saturated fat, no trans fat, 35 milligrams of cholesterol, 1,490 milligrams of sodium, 48 grams of carbohydrates, 4 grams of fiber, 10 grams of sugars, and 16 grams of protein. Aha! Now I see why they broke it down into 2 servings. Because of the sodium. Look at that for the whole can, it's 1,490 milligrams. So if they break the servings down into 2, the sodium content isn't nearly as high. But they didn't even break it down into 2. I realize it says about 2 servings per container, But why don't they simply find out the nutrition facts for the whole can and divide it by 2? I don't know, in my pea-sized brain, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to do the math the way they're doing the math. Now let's get our soup out of the can, into the pan, and get it heated up. Now once our soup was thoroughly heated up and we gave it a good mix, there was a couple things I noticed. First, is it my eyes tricking me, or does it look like the broth is separating? The second thing I noticed, which I notice in a lot of canned soup, is how white the potatoes are. And just in canned soups in general, how do they keep the potatoes to keep their texture without getting overly mushy in a can of soup? Inquiring minds want to know. Wow, and my first impressions of that spoonful of soup is it doesn't look very good. What are you, the people's thoughts? Also, if those are real pieces of chicken, my next career move is going to be a stand-up comedian, and that's not going to go well for me. I might do okay with the comedian part, but the standing part, not so well. So into the old pie hole, and down the gullet it went. Okay, first of all, surprisingly, the soup had a great flavor to it. But that's where the good ended, and the bad and the ugly began. The chicken was dry and almost powdery, if that makes any sense for something in broth. It kind of just disintegrated between the roof of my mouth and my tongue. And then the potatoes were even worse. They had the texture of wax cubes. Other than the flavor of the broth, there wasn't really anything great about this soup. It really lacked sustenance, which is why I'm giving it a 2 out of 10. Next, we have the Pitmaster sausage and beer cheese with potatoes soup. Here's the list of ingredients. The whole can has 550 calories, 33 grams of total fat, 12 grams of saturated fat, a half a gram of trans fat, 55 milligrams of cholesterol, 1,900 milligrams of sodium, 48 grams of carbohydrates, 4 grams of fiber, 4 grams of sugars, and 14 grams of protein. So that's darn near a whole day's worth of sodium in a can of soup.
No, Larry, our bodies need sodium. That's not really a lot of sodium, so it's okay. You can eat as much sodium as you want.
Scooter, had you ever heard the saying that children are supposed to be seen but not heard? You're simply missing the whole point of what I'm trying to do here. So please, pull up your underoos and shut up.
Okay, Larry, I'm just trying to say something and prove my point because I know everything, right?
Yes, Scooter, everyone already realizes that you know everything. Because you try to tell me and every other video creator on YouTube that you know everything. Now let's dump it out of the can and into the pan and get it heated up. And when we poured it out of the can, it looked like New England clam chowder, which isn't necessarily a bad thing if you like New England clam chowder. As we were stirring and heating our beer cheese soup, the aroma was smelling pretty darn good. So once it was thoroughly heated through, it was time to give it a try. So we got a big old spoonful of the beer cheese, the potatoes, and some sausage. Well, at least I think I got some sausage. It looks to be cut into small pieces, and it'll look pretty good on the spoon. So into the old pie hole, and down the gullet it went. Now that bite was actually pretty tasty. However, I didn't get any sausage, only beer cheese and potatoes, and the potatoes were cooked very well. So we scooped up another bite, and this time we were much more successful with getting quite a bit of sausage this time. So into the old pie hole, and down the gullet it went. Alright, the beer cheese soup is super rich, super creamy, with a nice smoky flavor from the sausage, and the potatoes again were cooked perfectly. The sausage and beer cheese soup was much better than the previous soup, but I still wanted a more hearty soup, even though this one was fairly hearty. But when I see the word Pitmaster, I expect a real hearty, belly-warming, belly-filling soup. So I'm giving this soup a 6 out of 10. The next can of Progresso Pitmaster soup is the Steakhouse style steak and bean soup. Here's the list of ingredients, and it looks like the beef is a formed meat slurry concoction, even though it's labeled as cooked, diced, seasoned beef. And what makes me think it's a formed meat slurry concoction is it contains modified food starch along with beef broth and other stuff. And it doesn't have any TVP, but it does have hydrolyzed soy protein, which is not really a meat substitute, but rather a flavor enhancer. The whole can has 260 calories, 3.5 grams of total fat, 1.5 grams of saturated fat, no trans fat, 20 milligrams of cholesterol, 1,440 milligrams of sodium, 49 grams of carbohydrates, 15 grams of fiber, 12 grams of sugars, and 20 grams of protein. Now let's get our soup out of the can, into the pan, and get it heated up. Now once our Steakhouse steak and bean soup is thoroughly heated, we give it a good mix, and then got a big old spoonful of the beef, the beans, the broth, the corn, the peppers, and the onions. And that actually looks pretty good, with the exception of the beef. That is obviously not real meat. Well, it might be real meat, but it's highly processed meat with other stuff in it. Well, at least I don't think it's real meat. I don't want to say it's not real meat and then get sued for slander. But it doesn't appear to be real meat. But let's put it into my pie hole and get it down my gullet and see what I think about it. Well, daggone it. That's actually pretty tasty. I think it might be the best one yet, with the exception of the meat. The soup had a really good flavor with a moderate spice to it. I love the navy beans, I love the corn and the other vegetables, and the meat didn't have bad flavor, but it was super dry and mushy. Almost like processed meat, like I said previously. Remember in the beginning of the video, I said I buy a lot of Progresso soups and use them for a base and add things to them to make them even better and heartier. And this is a prime example of a soup that I would add something to make it heartier, like leftover rice, leftover pasta, leftover vegetables, leftover meat, or even a couple eggs. That's one of my favorite things to add to a can of soup, is 2 or 3 eggs. Either whip them in or leave them whole and let them cook in the soup for a few minutes. So I'm giving the Steakhouse steak and bean soup a 7 out of 10. Thank you all very much for watching. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.